Hi all, Randi here, and welcome to another podcast. This podcast is contemplation and higher order psychic energetic investigation of the pyramids of Giza. Do I have the answers? Absolutely not. Do I have suggestions? Plenty. Who doesn't? Speculations? Plenty of possibilities there. There are many avenues we can walk down, off, on, if we so choose. We could do it via the astral field, look into the astral imprints of all of the thousands and thousands of people that have looked at the pyramids of Giza and contemplated. We can look upon it scientifically and come up with just as good a theory as they have come up with, because I am not really buying into that idea either. And we could, of course, come up with looking into the Akashic records, which I am not so sure are accurate either. Then we can go into the alien agenda ideas, of which some make sense and some does not make sense. So which angle am I here going to explore? Well, as always, I really don't see any need to put more information out there. There is a rewriting or a rebranding, to use that terminology, because there's a lot of the old topics that are now being picked up again and are getting a new interface, a new type of interpretation, of which some are very interesting. And others are just, okay, we have seen that before. Oh yeah, that was back in the 80s, they came up with that one. And then it's presented as if it's completely new, which it's not. So what do I have to add into the speculative interpretation of the pyramids in Giza? Well, I do have... I had one day where I entered into past life in my inner work, and I got some very, very interesting levels of information, but it was so far back that once I was out of the process and I cleared the timeline, most of these imprints and images and full, vivid, blown, real images of really being there, being part of that timeline in that physical form, so far back that it bordered into the reseeding processes of the fourth cycle, from where the human civilizations that, after the colonization, for a short period of time had access to the fourth dimension, and then that was shut down. And the whole vision entering back into that timeline, experiencing it all over again in a very alternate state of mind, meant that once I was done with the process, had cleared out and integrated what was to be integrated from that past life, it faded away, which is what this type of work should rightfully do. We are not encountering the past versions of ourselves to remember it vividly and carry the burden of the events that took place there. Past life work is about accessing it, undoing the trauma, finishing off the loose energetic ends that ties us to that timeline. And then once that's done, to collapse the access points, to eradicate these patterns in our emotional field, and by that diminish our chances of being recirculated within the enclosure. And that's what people call reincarnation, right? So this is how I work with my past lives, and this life has definitely had a lot of past lives that has been activated, and by that giving me and granting me a lot of insights, aside from the giving over from some of the groups that are still lingering on. Not many of them are. Quite a lot of them took off between 2016 and 2022. So the giving over has been less. Most of these groups were part of the colonizing species that came here when we got colonized 15,000 years ago. So that past vision was, as I said, it belonged to the fourth cycle reseeding that happened after the fall of Atlantis, but so close to our timeline that it was very, very near the colonization, where the world, the fourth cycle world that had been created with advanced civilizations that were able to work within the fourth dimension, and the fourth dimension was still present inside this reality field, which we know of our world. And then the colonization happened, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Let's just say it was on all levels of our solar system, hierarchical pillar project, organizational level within the governance pillar, there were multiple groups that saw it as a good idea to invite some of the ones in that later on ended up colonizing us. So trades were made, agreements were made, and I do not agree in any of them. I was not part of the solar system at the time, I was somewhere else. So in that way I can write off and say, well, I'm not responsible for it. But many of us are not responsible for these decisions either, but we are living in them, so we have a personal responsibility for the timelines that we as individuals are connected to, hence the timeline work. It's not a global responsibility, it's a local individual responsibility. If everyone was doing that, quite a lot of the things that led to the global patterns of colonization would then falter and being erased because they would not be upheld by the individual timeline connection points that are part of our reality field. So the civilizations we're talking about when we go into the true understanding of the old structures are part of what we call fourth dimensional aspect that used to be part of our reality field. And I'm not here talking about time. I'm talking about the actual fourth dimension that got segregated from our reality fields probably 9,000 years ago, more or less, give or take, perhaps even 12,000 years ago. So the question remains, if the pyramids date so far back to when we did have the fourth dimension actively present in our reality field, that would give a lot of explanations to the construction, how they could do so. But what then lingers on for me as a puzzle, the stones. Why build with so many stones? What would that be? If I'm envisioning a fourth dimensional reality field bleed through integration, part of this reality field process. And I'm sorry, I cannot explain it better because this is visually. When we enter into the fourth dimensional timelines, things do not work the way they do in our reality field. So the fourth dimension has completely different features. The laws of physics do not work the way they do in this reality field. And hence, when we look at things in the fourth dimension, it is like a hologram. So things are interpreted. That's the best option we have to look into the fourth dimension is part of code sequences, holographic structures, as well as purpose and function, as well as the understanding of, okay, if this has a purpose and a function, and it has what we call probability and possibilities, these are the four cornerstones of the fourth dimension: purpose and function, probability and possibility. So we're working within a reality field that everything that's engineered there has a purpose and a function, and these are two different things. Purpose is what we could say the way it impacts reality field energies. Function is the way it transforms the energies of that level of reality field. Probability is how high is the rate for that to be able to transform within that reality segment. And possibilities, what will then come of this transformational process? What would be the future outcome? How will it affect the past? How would the code streams, that's the foundation of reality field configurations, how will they be affected by this specific type of technology, life form, or structure? So that's the fourth dimension. So we begin to understand that the laws of physics in the fourth dimension are not the laws of physics as we know of it within our reality field, that where we could say you can remove humans completely from the world and it would technically, as far as we know, still function. It moves around. It's a structure in itself that does not need life forms. In the fourth dimension, life forms and reality field are intertwined. So that means that if there's no life form, the reality field goes dormant. Hence, purpose, function, probability, possibility, because everything that goes with there is supposed to lead to some kind of transformational process of the reality field. within the progressive worlds to the highest good of the many and the highest progression rate that allows all living life forms to transform their reality field to its highest purity rate, which means getting rid of all the effects of the timeline event, as well as upgrading their consciousness potentials into their highest progression rate, from where both energy and consciousness can leap into the next type of cycles that will be where the lowest base will be what we call life force, not as we understand it. In the lesser progressive worlds, it's about preservation of specific type of genetic structures and keeping their reality fields from going into complete regression and decomposition, which begins with chaos or entropy going into chaos and disorder, and then begin to crystallize. And from the crystallization, there is only evaporation as the last thing, like ice or like what you call it, nitrogen ice that you put on something, it freezes up, and then what you touch it just evaporates and turns into little bits and pieces that will then be thrown into what we call the lesser fortunate levels of energy of the past worlds that used to be. And there it will become what we call dust. And within these dust dynamics will create different types of stars and different types of features that we know from our universe, because our universe is within the sector of decomposing elements that are belonging to a past cycle, the third cycle type of energy units that are no longer in use in the worlds that are moving beyond the limitations of the quote unquote, what I call the abyss. So our universe is positioned within the third cycle. We've been pushed back there due to many reasons and choices that have been done by the civilizations that have sojourned and participated in our solar system as well as in our sector. So with that understanding, we also understand the necessity of disconnecting from the timelines of this reality field, because otherwise we'll get sucked further back into the third cycle type of energies where things get more and more technocratic, and we are already borderline there, as those of you with eyes to see with and ears to hear with will have observed with this whole rollout of technology. And yes, I also use technology, but there's a huge difference between using technology within what we call the progressive dynamics, where we are in complete administration mode, I would put that word there, because it is a collaboration with the third cycle energies that can become part of what we call machines and technology. But it's mainly in the fifth dimension, and that means again that when we enter into the fifth dimension, then the fourth dimension, as you just learned, is purpose and function, probability and possibility. In the fifth dimension, consciousness is added on, and that makes the biggest change in how technology unfolds. It becomes an extension of who and what we are. I have clear memories of being part of a Pleiadian craft that I was operated completely on my own, and it was an extension of my physical form where I used AI that was a program I had built as an extension of my consciousness potentials, so I could utilize that extension via different forms of what we call cubes. In the fifth dimension, there are both positive and negative type of cubes. The cube technology is technically Syrian technology, but the Pleiadians, they use the M cubes, memory cubes, to store information, so they didn't have not walking around remembering everything. But it's not about memory, because consciousness and energy goes together with the fourth dimensional features, and there begin to create what we call a synergetic effect of how consciousness go in and affects the purpose and function, how consciousness go in and affect the probable outcome, as well as the timelines that it's integrated into. And there we begin to come into very, very complex understanding of science. And if I apply that to the pyramids, it's just kind of the only thing I can think of, because I have thought of, okay, the burial chamber theory does not add up. They had the Valley of Kings and they buried them there. So that's not what it is. Then there's been this kind of, they're theorizing about, is it a kind of a dynamo? Is it a kind of a portal? What is it? A lot of good suggestions have come up. And I'm pretty sure that perhaps all of them have been in use at some point. That's why it's not just one explanation. There's probably multiple timelines, alternate realities, where each of them had played out a different version of what the pyramids were used for. I even contemplated on whether or not after the reseeding and in what we call more similar to the world that we know of, that they have been used as storage units, which they might have been, but that doesn't mean it's the original purpose. My biggest question is the stones, the granite stones. Why this thick layer of stones and why these big stones? We have that in all the megalithic structures. Why the big stones? And to cut the thinking process short, when we talk about all the megalithic structure, if we're talking about Pumba Punga or we're Machu Picchu or whatever they're called, all of these fancy structures where we have stonework that are magnificently cut out, clearly indicating advanced technology that's not belonging to the type of humans that we have agreed that we were at that time 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. So clearly something else is going on here. So no doubt about that. Is it completely aliens? No, I don't think so. I'll stick to my memories of the fourth dimension still being part of advanced civilizations. And I go with Graham Hancock when he theorized and saying there were both advanced civilizations that were near, not just near, but here, that there were kind of both what we call the regressing civilizations. Okay, instead of me turning on and off and pausing, I've got a dog around my feet here. Not my dog, I am dog sitting. So you will hear the little dog make sounds. It's okay. She's a kind one. Okay, so just for those of you who can hear that in the background, I will not... anyways, so Graham Hancock theorizes that, and I agree with that one, that there were simultaneously civilizations where some were more advanced than others, which in his latest ancient apocalyptic ideas theorize upon that. Definitely worth watching. It's on Netflix right now. So anyway, so aside from that, I do not disagree in his ideas that he's presenting there, although they kind of all tie into this whole thing that everything that's constructed is constructed according to solstice and the stars and how all of these things work. And I'm still not sure I'm buying into that idea either. Not in the form they are theorizing upon it. Because again, that there are things there that just doesn't add up. So we have a lot of good questions that needs to be asked when we talk about these ancient structures. But aside from that, what I would say, and this is not Graham Hancock, this is my version of why were some more advanced and why were some regressing. The ones that were regressing were part of some of the regressed lineages within the humanoid projects that regressed into a previous state of their existence and turned into the Neanderthals. At the same time, we had the original solar system humanities that were also part of a reality field, and they were still in alignment and still had access to the advanced technologies. Then we had the reseeding of the Atlanteans that were part of a fifth cycle experimental program with some of the humanoid groups from either the Sirian system or the Orion system, some of these groups that are part of the Atlantean timelines. So there's a lot of things here that must be taken into consideration. We are talking about many different layers that are left behind for us within these structures. So there's no simple answer, and people say, oh, come on, you can give the answer. Well, the first step here is that we have had different types of civilizations on our planet. Some were regressing and others were progressing. We're still seeing that to this day. We had civilizations that were still in contact with the fourth dimension, either as humanoids or as part of the solar system humanities, which I call true humans. And I call them true humans because the humans we are today are not really true humans. They're kind of an artificial recreation, downsized, and not really what it used to be. We don't have access to the fourth dimension other than in dream time, which is engineered for us and controlled by different types of dream programs. So in that way, we're not really who we used to be. So hence true humans versus current day humans. So that's step one, to realize and accept that. With that then opens up a lot of other questions of our ancient history, which many have claimed as well, so I'm not the only one saying that. And it comes into the investigation of our past and why we should look into our past. And there I have given the answer that it's timeline work, so we can disconnect to the artificial timelines, and by that make sure that either we move on to wherever we want to move on to by our own free will, or that the current state of our reality field will not linger on, but will reach its point of collapse as it's supposed to in 2135, and then be reset to its original solar system configuration. So that's the important takeaway from this one right now. There is, of course, more to say. But for now, I will leave it at this. Why is it important to look into the past via our higher order psychic energetic abilities and try to connect to the timelines? It is important because it is part of our fifth dimensional structure. And the fifth dimensional structure that we have in our holographic energetic architecture links to the fifth cycle. And the fifth cycle is the one that is necessary for humanity as we know of it to leap into the future, where we, at future timelines after 2135, will connect to more prosperous fifth cycle futures that are not and will not, that are not grown out of the Atlantean timelines and will not fall into the distortion dynamics of the Atlantean timelines, as well as not connecting to the fifth cycle that within our own solar system before the Atlantean project got scattered and have turned into what we now call the asteroid belt. I've talked about that other places. Here I'll just shorten it up and said we had a fifth cycle human civilizations that were living in that segment of our reality field. The fifth ring around the core, which is not the sun at that point in time. There were no planets at that point in time. There is nothing that we know of in that point of time because it was outside of time. It was in the fifth dimension. But the timeline event hit, and all fifth cycle races were hit by the timeline event, as I talk about in my book, The Source of Humanity. That rippled into our fifth cycle, and with that also hit our fifth cycle races that at that time were getting ready to learn to master the 511 pillar, which includes technology. After consciousness comes technology, but then you know how to use your consciousness with the technology because you have mastered the fourth dimension, you have mastered the fifth, as with adding on the consciousness, and then you go and begin to add in the technology, working with consciousness imbued technology. That did not go so well because of the timeline event. So that level of our reality field began to crystallize and go into rigid structures, which pushed them back in time and connected to the third cycle. And with that, literally made the entire fifth cycle of our solar system highly dysfunctional. So that's part of our journey into the fifth cycle, that we are entering into an area of our reality field that did not go so well. There has not yet been a successful transformative process through the fifth cycle within our solar system. So that's why we have to travel back and then figure out which of the fifth cycle timelines do we want to be on. And that is part of the future humanity. So we kind of have to undo the past to be able to clear the now so that we can move into the future on different timelines than the ones that were already put into possibility via the fourth dimensional actions from the groups that were here trying to add on their consciousness potentials and did not succeed to do so. So that's part of the process that we're in as well. So with this first one, because there's much, much more to say, I'm just putting this one in as a continuation of Secrets from Beyond, where the idea is that I will continue making podcasts here and there, where I contemplate on some of these things. As always, it's not about giving the answers, because nobody learns by being given the answer. And when we talk about multidimensionals, there are never just one answer. There are a lot of different answers depending on what timeline we're on, depending on the consciousness potentials, depending on from what angle of the pillar project, depending on what type of energy that's been used, depending on what lineage that has unfolded these potentials of the different timelines, and onward and so forth. So the next step in our learning process of the future is to learn to work with complex information systems that ties into different possibilities and probabilities. And the only true answer we can get is to find the root. And the root will always be the purpose and function. Once we know that, we also know what it led to, and then we begin to clear the timelines. And once we have cleared the timelines of what had taken place and no longer led to any positive future, because it had, we would be on them now, then we redo it to the best of our abilities using our current state of higher order energetic possibilities, integrating the consciousness potentials we have from these timelines, and make choices that lead to different activities, that leads to different processes of energy and consciousness, and by that leads to different potential outcomes of what we can become as a civilization. And this is one of the most important secrets from beyond, is that we are the masterminds of the future timelines. Not someone else, us. And with that, I want to end this podcast. Thank you.